Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan show. I did end up trading off the Taurus at the gun show and picked up this gun. This is an older Smith & Wesson revolver, but anyway, my philosophy when it comes to handguns is basically that a handgun is what you carry when you're not really expecting to need a gun for anything, but you still want to be prepared for the unexpected. And consequently, a handgun without a holster is kind of like a car without wheels. It doesn't do you a lot of good, because if we're going to carry this for the unexpected, we need a way to carry it conveniently, where it's still out of the way as we're going about our business. Now, there's a lot of different holster options out there. Some of them are probably very serviceable. Many of them are also kind of expensive. And so what I've found is generally the best approach is simply to make your own. It's not that hard to do, and it generally provides you with a much better quality holster without spending a whole lot of money. And you can do it fairly easily with just some simple tools here. Most of this stuff you can pick up at any hardware store. Of course, you'll also need some leather. So what I have here is a piece of veg-tanned cowhide. It's fairly thick. I don't know if you can see the calipers, but this is almost 3/16 of an inch thick, a little less than that. You want your leather fairly thick for holsters. I wouldn't go less than about 1/8 of an inch if possible. Yeah, if at all possible, get veg-tanned horsehide. It's a little more moldable, holds its shape a little better. Horsehide is my favorite material for making holsters. But if you can't get horsehide, and it is kind of hard to find, cowhide is much more readily available, and it works almost as well. When you're buying leather, you also oftentimes have a choice of different cuts. When they tan a hide, they cut it up into different sections. There's the shoulder area, there's what they call the bend, which if, on a horse that would be like the saddle area of the animal. And then there's a strip along the back of the hide, over sort of the rump area, which they actually call the butts, the butts of the hide. And oftentimes they'll actually just cut off the butts and throw it away or sell it for scrap. And so that's actually my favorite part of the hide to make holsters out of, partly because it's cheap, and partly because it tends to be stiffer than some of the other areas. Before we start cutting any leather, what I like to do is take a piece of newspaper, or any kind of paper works. I'm using newspaper because I've got it on hand, and just wrap it around the gun and kind of trace the outline of where we want the holster to be. And this will give us an idea of the size and shape of the piece of leather that we're going to need. Then we'll go ahead and cut out this piece of newspaper. Now we're going to go ahead and trace around our newspaper pattern. But when we do that, we want to offset all of our boundaries out, anywhere from 1/4 inch to maybe 1 inch at most. And the reason we do that is because newspaper is very thin, very flexible. It forms itself to the contours of the gun very easily. Leather, because of its thickness, it's going to take a little bit more leather to cover the entire gun. So we want to make sure that we leave enough and don't cut our piece of leather too small. If we make the holster a little large, we can always trim off some of the fringes. If we make it too small, we'll have to do it over again, and that's going to be a waste of leather. so now I'm going to take just a regular old X-Acto knife and cut out this piece of leather. The next step is to take this leather and soak it to render it supple. Okay, so I went ahead and set that piece of leather in some warm tap water to soak for a few minutes. You know, it doesn't have to soak very long, just a few minutes until it softens up. In the meantime, one thing that we want to be real sure of when we mold the leather around this firearm is that the holster design is such that the front sight is not going to catch when we try to draw the gun. And so, to make sure that the leather doesn't kind of wrap itself around the back of the front sight, we want to take this little piece of wood and glue it on like that to make sure that there's space in the holster for that front sight when we're holstering the gun and drawing it. So we're just going to hot glue this to the top of the gun. It'll be easy to remove once we're done, but it'll hold it in place while we're molding the holster. Now that we've got our soaked leather, it's just a matter of molding the holster into the shape that we want it and riveting everything together. Now, another thing we'll want to take into account as we're working on the end of the holster here is we want to have some kind of loop at the bottom of the holster so we can attach a tie down in use. And the way I'm going to do that in this case is I'm going to put a rivet through the end, and I'm just going to attach a strip of leather in between the two sides of the holster, and I'll just fold that back and rivet it as I'm riveting the base of the holster here. Now, another thing that we don't want to forget to do as we're riveting the upper half here is before we put the rivets in up here, we'll want to attach a snap here so that we can put a strap across the hammer to hold the gun in the holster in use. Okay, now we're ready to attach the thong that'll hold the gun in the holster. To do that, what we'll want to do is actually cut off just a little piece of this belt loop, and then we'll rivet the thong to the back of this piece of leather so it drapes over the hammer and connects with that snap. So now we're pretty much done making this holster. The last thing we want to do to ensure that it has the proper fit is actually first just spray the gun down with WD-40 to protect the steel from the wet leather. Then reholster it and actually leave it in the holster while the leather dries. Okay, so we let this sit overnight and the holster is pretty much dried out. At this point we can take the gun out and the leather holds its shape. The last thing we're going to do here before this holster enters regular service is just to oil it. And you can use neat's foot oil, which is specially formulated for leather preservation. If you don't have neat's foot oil, you can also use a light motor oil. You could use vegetable oil. You can use just about anything. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use WD-40. I'm going to spray it inside the holster as well. And we'll just go ahead and buff the holster a little. And that's pretty much all there is to it. This may be kind of an improvisational way to make a holster, but I've gotten a lot of use out of holsters like this. They're very functional, very durable, and relatively easy to make.